All right, everybody, thanks for showing up. This is our third stage in our track. So we've had full rooms all day, so that's great. We're going to look at Netflix's journey through WebAuthn with Tejas Dharamshi and from Netflix and Jerrod Chong from Yubico.
Hey, thank you. Sorry, I've been having really bad throat, so if you guys don't hear, please feel free to stop me or just raise your hand. My name is Tejas Dharamshi. I'm a senior security engineer working on the Netflix's identity and access engineering team. This morning, me and Will Rose, we spoke about a few things about like how we move towards more of an identity-centric like perimeter. So just want to provide like some background context in terms of why this WebAuthn journey is also very important in terms of where our entire like identity and access story is headed towards and why this plays a very crucial role. In 2016, we went global. We started streaming content all at the same time in more than 190 countries. And with that global expansion, there were a lot of different dynamics that was coming towards Netflix in terms of from the business, from the apps, from the users, like a whole bunch of different heuristics coming towards Netflix. And I'll talk about those in a bit. One of them was we were actually going to go global, meaning we will have employees, we'll have contractors, we'll have our entire partner ecosystem of users working across the globe, more either from a corporate perspective or through business engagement perspective in terms of these partners or vendors working with us to provide content, or they're working on their studios, or they're our ISP partners and so on and so forth. So there's going to be a different mix of population that we'll be seeing in our ecosystem. We started moving our entire like Netflix production or Netflix originals to more of sort of a digital transformation, where we started like making a whole bunch of applications to solve the life cycle of a particular production. So building applications that were primarily catered towards the production, and all of our cast and crew that were going to be working on our productions, they will be accessing our application. So there was a huge there was going to be a huge mix of such population that is going to come, will be coming into our ecosystem to access our applications. And the entire other landscape of our partner ecosystem, which is an expansion of our ISP, our media partners, our content partners all across the globe, all of these facets was seeing an increase in terms of the volume of people coming into and trying to access our systems. So we want to make sure like we think about use cases in the way that is going to make sense, and make sense in some way that us as security trying to drive some initiatives to make stronger identity, at the same time catering towards our like business use cases. So we have to think in that direction. And just the exponential range of like applications being developed was just expanding every single day. Both internal applications catered towards the production, our ISP, our Open Connect, like so on and so forth. Even engineering applications, the kind of engineering applications that we're building was just different types of apps, and the apps being accessed by not just employees anymore, but apps being accessed by every possible population that is going to have ever access to our ecosystem. So a large volume in the number of apps that were getting built as well. So this morning and my prior talks as well, I've spoken about quite a bit about like our journey in terms of how we want to move towards zero trust and the journey that we have done so far. One of the core principles that we want to actually emphasize much more is the notion of like the stronger authentication. So stronger authentication, how can we achieve stronger authentication? Considering the range of like dynamics in terms of the population of users, the kind of apps being built, and where the business is heading. So we're going to try to keep this talk specifically focused on that and where the WebAuthn journey comes into picture. So with this specific stronger authentication is like unfortunately, we have to start with a weaker form of authentication, which is the username and password, right? So that's the premise in terms of like our corporate employee identity, our partner identity. That's where the journey starts. But that journey has been proven to be susceptible to so many different types of attacks. Let that be credential theft, let that be malware getting installed on end users' machines, and so on and so forth. So we want to basically make sure we handle those kind of attacks in a way that the identities that we are provisioning, they are protected against that. So a natural, or let's go through a journey in terms of like how a person or an account would be phished for the credentials. So me as a victim, I click on a link that I get in my email, and when I click on the link, I get taken to a login page, which just looks like exactly like the regular login page I've been going through. Like think about LinkedIn or Facebook. Once I go there, I would naturally I'll enter my credential, but behind the scene, what's happening is the credentials are being stolen by the attacker. And the attacker is stealing the credential, basically replaying the credentials back to your real website. And that's how they will basically take over the account and gain access to important Netflix resources. So we definitely want to mitigate this specific type of attack. So a natural progression towards that is to use additional forms of authentication. And to use additional form of authentication, we have to think about what kind of population of user base we have in our ecosystem. We have people both here in the US and all across the globe, and people who are either directly employed or they're working either through vendors or freelancers, and people are working through either on a content side or production side. So there's a varied set of dynamics in terms of user base. So we have to think about the options as well in a holistic fashion of what we want to provide and what would make sense from an end user perspective. So we support a range of options. We support push notifications. We support TOTP as well. I put in here SMS as well, SMS OTP specifically here. And that is, we really want to discourage that. And that's a model that we have gone through in our ecosystem in terms of discouraging like SMS altogether. And if there needs to be, if there's a really exceptional, very VVIP use case, then we might think about it. But really, we want to avoid that specific option altogether. And a quick walkthrough in terms of like how these options are, they work great in terms of adding additional forms of factor to your authentication story. But they are still susceptible to the same issue which was there with the first factor as well, in terms of these factors can also be phished. And one classic way of these factors can be phished is same victim getting an email with a link, and you click on the link, you're taken to the same fake login page. As part of the login process, in addition to the attacker stealing your credential, as part of that process, there might be an additional factor of authentication that might be needed. So the real website or the real web service would be sending out that additional form of authentication factor to the real user. The user would approve it, and the attacker is gaining access to our Netflix resources, and the real user gets taken to a fake success page. So these forms of attacks are very much possible, and we want to mitigate these forms of attacks as well. And this is where the next journey is super crucial, and we'll dive more into that.
Thanks, Tejas. So I think this is a WebAuthn FIDO2 session. So it's a quick recap. I don't think we need to go too much into that. But a couple of things that we want to call out, which is obviously the journey that Netflix took was starting at WebAuthn. And part of it was because of the great awareness of the work that we've done, but also because of the more favorable options for platform support. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Obviously, FIDO authentication itself is the umbrella principle here, which is using public key cryptography, and we need to address the phishing issue at the core of the protocol and not do other things outside it. So what we really are trying to strive for is that when you talk about phishing protections, what we must be able to handle is that obviously the user can use an authenticator. Obviously you have the same login page, but sort of this model then stops from the previous model that we've seen before. Because the first thing that happens is that in the FIDO protocol, you will send a challenge, and part of the protocol is that you will actually do the intelligence to know that this is not the right origin or not the right site that you're actually assessing. So the protocol should take care to make sure that, first of all, it will fail. The authenticator will say, I've never registered for this site before. Why am you asking me to authenticate to the site? And this is all transparent to the user. The user doesn't have to know anything. It doesn't have to know whether he's reading the right, lock on the top and making sure that the URL is the correct one. They don't care. They don't have to care. They don't have to know about it. For some reason, you did manage to trick the user to actually use the authenticator for the wrong site, and you did manage to get it back. Then on the back end, you should also be able to reject it, which means that all intelligence is part of the protocol. And if you do check back as the Netflix server, it says, hey, we've never actually got the right signature for the right authentication challenge that I've asked the user to do. So we want to make sure that the journey is not about doing things sort of outside the standard. These are all basic things that the FIDO protocol, WebAuthn protocol takes care of. And it's really what we're here to talk about. So this time last year, we had some progress in the WebAuthn specification. It was candidate recommendation. And you could sort of see that things are moving. Obviously, WebAuthn, before WebAuthn was, some of you familiar with FIDO U2F, and that was very restricted to the Chrome environment and the Google environment. So this time last year, we've got massive sort of adoption within the ecosystem from Firefox and Microsoft as well. So moving in that direction. And obviously, I think if everybody threw the milestone, which is earlier this year, we've ratified it to level 1 for the standard, which you're working on level 2. But again, the big call out is obviously it becomes very attractive when a lot more operating systems, a lot more browsers support a standard that you can just sort of use things out of the box. Why is this a major milestone? So one of the reasons why we work with Netflix to sort of create this experience, it's really a user journey, is because now you have more options as sort of a service, as a organization to provide value for the customer. And obviously, in the specification, it calls out for built-in authenticators as well as external authenticators. And this is important because you have diversity in use case, you have diversity in user experience. So you want as many options as possible, leveraging things that are built into devices, leveraging things that kind of come as part of the overall operating system. But at the same time, also supporting additional forms of authentication spaces where it gives you more options to solve use cases where maybe you cannot bring a phone in, or you need high assurance, or even for the case where you need additional forms of modalities for backup and recovery. So the big change that we see now is the available now part. So we call out a couple of things in this journey, which is on Android, you can experience this built-in and external as part of that journey. So today, if you say, I want to build something, what can I experience this on? So that is available now. Like this is shipping now on all these devices and operating systems that come. Coming soon is even more exciting. I mean, there are various forms of betas and early releases on the ecosystem, as we can tell. Safari on macOS has it's live, but you got to do a developer thing and you turn on the flag. But obviously, the next release it's all built in. So the journey is really exciting because we started with like sort of one platform vendor, one sort of environment, now expanding to quite significant other places. And ultimately, the control is not just for Netflix, but it's also control for the users. The users now have this choice to decide how they want to use it, and they not get sort of sandboxed away just because I'm using X, I can't experience the standard. So that's what we want to focus on, which is like as the standards evolve, you kind of see the adoption for different user groups become actually more aggressive and more expansive. In general, I mean, this is a quick summary. We do want to get to the demos because everybody was really excited came in to see the demo. But at a high level, we work with Netflix to create, they used a number of our open source server-side components to build out their WebAuthn server. Obviously, so they built out the server, the FIDO server, and they built all the other pieces together. It needs to be part of obviously a multi-factor authentication story. It can't be like WebAuthn. WebAuthn needs to plug into a current life cycle of the user identity cycle. And so that experience allows then the rest of the pieces is if the client platforms are available and the users are using it, the users have external authenticators, it just works, right? So focusing on trying to just build it, which is build the stuff on the right, and everything on the left is already done out of the box, which is fantastic.
Cool. Let's get into the more interesting aspect in terms of like getting into the demo and seeing some of these core things in action. And I'll stop through and explain like as and when things are going about like in the demo as well. So in the initial step, what I'm going to present here is like this is a partner user who's trying to access any of the Netflix resource, and they have nothing enrolled right now, and how they would go about like self-service enrolling into different forms of multi-factor authentication, and specifically the focus being into using WebAuthn and being able to register their security key, right? So that's the first step in the milestone. So this is my tester account, like trying to get access to one of the Netflix resources. And as during the process itself, we have our own multi-factor auth service, which is homegrown. And when you're going through that process, you are basically being asked to register your security key. And this is basically using the WebAuthn protocol, which gives us nice interoperability between various different browsers and various different dynamics about the browsers itself. So here, like in the first experience that you just saw, I registered my roaming authenticator. I call them roaming authenticators, like your security key, your phone, your TOTP authenticator. Those are all like roaming authenticators. And so you registered your security key, which is what we want to lean more people towards. And that's what you have enrolled so far. And as you go through this process, when you come back to access our ecosystem, and based on the morning's talk, like it goes to the adaptive authentication, and if it's really required, and considering like we have used security key as a stronger form, this can help drive our adaptive authentication as well. Meaning, we have used security key, which is phishing resistance, and that way we can actually put more emphasis in terms of how do we adaptively authenticate our users, considering they're using like stronger forms of mechanisms in here. In the next demo here, what I'm going to talk about, like now I have a roaming authenticator. Now, how do I go about taking this and start off in a path wherein I can enroll my native devices itself? Let that be Mac, let that be Windows, let that be Android. How can I start moving in that progress, like and register multiple different credentials? So as part of this, here the first step is like we are using Chrome and Touch ID on Mac. And the way we have done it is make it more of a gaming model, as in like you finish a stage, new things unlock, and you keep expanding in that process. Likewise in here, since I've enrolled like roaming authenticator, now when I try to go and enroll new devices in our ecosystem, new things get unlocked, and these are based on things that we have identified based on the browser capabilities. And that's where like WebAuthn also provides that capability in terms of whether the browser supports that capability or not. So here, there was a detection done. The built-in authenticator is available. Let's go about like enrolling now my Mac itself into the process. So now I have two sets of credentials that I can use against the same aspect. Let's take this one step forward. Now I move and get a new Windows machine as well, and I want to continue this journey from here to there as well. How do I go about this? I have a roaming authenticator which I registered using a security key. Let's use that to bootstrap Windows itself in its native form. So here I'm going through the same process, and now on a Windows Hello machine. And as part of that particular process, I would go about first verifying my credential, like using my roaming authenticator. Once I do that, I have other forms of authenticator registered, and now I can get more things unlocked. Now there's Windows capability available. I can register that and completely use that as a means of carrying out additional forms of authentication. So as you see, the journey is progressing from one platform to another, and now I can come back and use whatever platform I had registered back into this ecosystem. So here, I'm getting back on my Mac, and I'm trying to access again one of our resources. I would go about using my Touch ID, likewise, Windows Hello. I would go about using that, what I'd registered, and register that specific set of credentials as well. So there's a nice progression happening in this space where you can start registering multiple different forms of authenticator, and more importantly, platform authenticator, because that's where, at least like from our perspective, we are putting a lot of emphasis in terms of you need to have things which you can actually use to bootstrap other forms of authenticator, and security keys which gives us like that nice phishing resistance. But at the same time, you don't want to carry security keys all the time, so might as well just use that to bootstrap new devices and move forward. So, and finally, the cool thing is about like the mobile experience as well, and specifically Android for now. Hopefully, Apple comes around. So here I'm going through my Android phone, and I'm trying to log in to gain access to my resources, and I'm trying to use the existing roaming authenticator that I had, which was a security key, to log into our systems. And once I do that, now I can go about and register the native authenticator, which shows Windows Hello, but like it's using the Android's native authenticator now to register that set of credentials. And finally, once I have that set of credentials available, now I can totally use that to access the same set of apps, now from an Android device, to gain access to our resources. Cool.
So great. So the last part is really that if this journey is we work through several different things in terms of the experience and the server side things, but now we sort of in a very good place that we can share a lot of the resources with the ecosystem, with the community. It's really not that hard. We've been sort of iterating a lot on the feedback, working with different parties. We feel like it's time that if you haven't started, experience it to yourself, your journey. Now's the time. Plenty of things that can get you going. And now with, did you want to talk a minute about the deployment so far?
Yeah. So we have deployed the platform that we have built so far to quite a bit of our population. So we are deployed to pretty much all of our customer service population, which is about like 7,000-ish population. So we have deployed this specific platform to them. For our partners, we have deployed to roughly around like 3,000-ish partners, out of which we have a good traction, about like 10% of our partners adopting into the security key, which was a little bit of a shocker for us as well. We were initially thinking that we would just purely get like push notification as a mechanism, but 10% is a good start, and we are pushing our numbers in that specific aspect. So yeah, so that's where we are. And for our employee, we have like the stronger forms of authentication already deployed. So yeah, so good mix of things going on.
I think we'll open it up for questions.
A great presentation, good journey. Talk about a little bit of your adoption by partners or by employees, especially on the security key. Mm-hmm. How did you go about telling them did you ask them to buy the security? Did you provide the security key?
Yeah, so that's been always a challenge in terms of how we can push this out to our masses, specifically with respect to distribution. And there are two sets of patterns that we have tried to adopt. Partners where we can actually be proactive in terms of shipping this out to our partners. We have adopted that model as well. And at the same time, we encourage partner engagement people like our PEMs, what we call them, partner engagement managers, to work with the partners to make sure they have the right set of tooling that they need in terms of keys and help them out in that space. Right. So, but yeah, distribution is challenging, and we're working towards that to have more accurate model.
You talk a lot about mobile devices and laptops, but people, especially for Netflix, sometimes use smart TVs and set-top box. So did you add those use cases in mind? do you plan to use a CIBA for that or something else? Thank you.
Yeah, good question. So more often than not, like when we talk about Netflix identity, there are different forms of identity in our ecosystem. One is every user who is a subscriber who is accessing Netflix to stream our content. And then we have the entire corporate population, which we call them employees and partners. So this is more focused on that set of population, which is basically trying to gain access to privileged access to Netflix resources and not the streaming content, because there the attack vector is very minor compared to what we have the attack vector on the corporate side. So.
Account sharing in terms of licensing from your OV partners is not a problem?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Account sharing in terms of licensing from your media partners, the ones that are using these and things like that. In fact, I share my account
Sure.
with her. It's not a problem for them.
Yeah.
It's
You can repeat the question, please.
So yeah, the question is like, and this is more not related to the topic specifically, but on account sharing specifically on the Netflix.com product, is that a problem? I think we should take that offline, and I'll want to keep the focus on this specific topic.
I think the last question.
The system key that you mentioned, what exactly is that? Can you explain like how do you get it and what?
Which aspect, like the system itself, the platform itself?
Yeah, the system key that you register initially when you in your demo.
Oh, that was a security key, YubiKey, that I registered. So that was a YubiKey Series 5.
Yeah,
right.
5. There's a security key that we did the demo on.
Yeah. So that was the first one.
We'll keep it going. As long as they have questions, we'll keep going.
Okay.
I've got a kind of a reverse question on this one. You had a lot of experience here. So going back in time, before you started this effort, what's one thing you wish you could carry back to when you first started this effort? One thing that you learned along the way that would be good for us to keep in mind as we start to develop towards this sort of roadmap?
Yeah, one thing that at least, and we had done a ton of user experience testing with our users, real users, and user experience testing meaning sitting with the users, trying to see where they're heading towards in terms of our platform itself. And we have done a lot of tweaks based on that. And what we have tried to, like at least from our platform that we have built, is more provide educational information right from the tool, because MFA itself and its sound itself is like too complex for any user, right? So we don't want that to happen to our end users. So we guide the users every step through the way. And specifically with security key, the experience that we have at least heard from our partners is that, and with these roaming platform authenticators, that the experience is super top notch, because you don't have to think about, oh, remove my phone, approve, or what is this TOTP that you're talking about? Or rather like just click the thing that you have been clicking and go with that. So yeah, that's where we are pushing more towards guiding users to the right options and not leaving the options to the end user to pick and choose. So guide them towards more stronger, better options. At the same time, indicate the benefits of that, right? Because at the end of it, everything has to have a benefit. Otherwise, it's nothing for the end user.
Gotcha. Sure. Educate within the tools,
right,
so that people have it right there in front of them.
Exactly. Yeah. Not like go and read through this 100-page doc and figure it out by yourself. Yeah.
So I have a quick question. Like in reality, how many people do you see registering so many authenticators? Like, I mean, us as identity people, we could try that out. But in reality, real users, how many authenticators typically do they actually register or use?
At least like in reality, and like some of the numbers that we have seen is at the bare minimal, they register 2 forms of authenticators, right? With respect to like where we have deployed security key, is one, they want to have something which is actually constantly roaming. And for ease of like keeping the things that is roaming and keep it native, so that when I'm focused on my work, this is my work setup, I just keep using that. So the max that for regular users that I see is like 2 authenticators. And people are using actually push notifications just to register one and only one device, right? Which is their primary phone. So that's where we have seen the numbers in that space so far.
Yeah, in all the demos, FIDO was more of a second factor of authentication. Why not replace passwords?
That's a very good question. So for us to go there, we cannot just come up with one day and say, let's move to passwordless and let's introduce you all these new terminologies for you. What we want to do is like slowly progress in that direction, where let's first introduce the technologies to you, get you familiarized with where we are headed towards, and then move you towards that mindset.
And so go ahead.
Last thing I wanted to add was, there would be the best ideal word where we truly, the passwordless means something wherein we are not truly using password, but the whole idea about passwordless is not to present passwords when they're actually not needed, but they would still be around, at least for the near foreseeable future, right? So how can we not present passwords from where the user has been coming constantly, and just keep on verifying the user with just single factor, right?
Yeah, and I just want to add one point about that is like, so the platforms are not all there with sort of that overall experience with like no passwords. So I think the spec work is done, but the technology or the platforms are not fully there yet. We expect them to be there probably later this year. So I think it's also a technology gap right now. Everybody's identified it, but even if the technology is there today, for example, the mental model about what it is to be passwordless, I don't think people understand that.
Yeah.
Like there's no recovery anymore. So if you did not register more than one authenticator,
That's right.
you will be completely locked out.
Yep.
So there's no central place to reset anything. So I think the model needs to shift from how we provide value to the customer, which is you actually have to encourage them to, in fact, you must register more than one authenticator in this model. So that hasn't shifted yet because most people are just thinking of MFA as the second factor now. But once the technology is ready, then there's a mind shift for people to think about what does it mean to not even have a backup as a call your help desk to reset a password, which doesn't exist anymore.
For your employees, do you issue FIDO keys for everyone, or is it more like a bring your own FIDO key? And if that's the option, how do you ID proof to make sure the token binding is there?
Employees is actually, like, at least from our ecosystem, is the easier population to tackle in terms of distribution. Everyone just gets it day one, or we have like vending machines in our ecosystem where they can just go and pick it up. So that is easier. Regarding ID proofing, like specifically for our employees, every employee that comes in, they go through like an onboarding process day one, right? So you have to be physically present. You present your government issue ID and whatnot. So that happens in terms of ID verification, right? And that's where everything is handed over to you day one. But yeah, like. The key specific aspect for distribution of employees is relatively simple for us.
Yeah, so the FIDO2 specification is for Yubico as well as Google has Titan. So I would assume that it is not tied to Yubico itself. So would this be working with Titan?
Yeah, it's any like FIDO2 compliant like security key.
Yeah, so I had a question around the phishing slide you had. I wanted to know if you used any SSO mechanism, for example, OpenID Connect, to authenticate against any standard enterprise identity providers. Would the attack surface get reduced? The way you mentioned, it's a plain username password, and the attacker would be able to get it. So just wanted to understand that perspective.
Yeah, so I would definitely encourage you to check out like this morning or like the RSA talk in terms of how our the entire like federation hub is set up and what sort of IDPs we have. Like in a quick nutshell, like two primary IDPs that we leverage in our ecosystem. One is Google, being where all the employees are managed, and we rely on Google's 2SV for that. And then the entire partner ecosystem where we have our own homegrown solution, wherein this particular platform is also deployed with. So that's where we use either Google and Google's 2SV, or we use our own IDP and our own like this thing. So yeah, so that's
got time for two more questions, please. Two more.
So is adding a platform a user's decision? And if so, how do you prevent someone from accidentally adding a public computer or something as the trusted device?
Yeah, so right now, at least like the journey we have reached is adding a platform is adding yet another device to your multi-factor authentication. Where we want to go towards is, as we are identifying what forms of authenticators that you've added, guide people to indicate that, hey, better forms of, simpler forms of authentication are enabled. You see that today on iOS, you see that on Android. Hey, Face ID is supported, do you want to enable it? Touch ID supported, do you want to enable it? That kind of mental model we want to shift towards. Now, in terms of registering any public computer out there, so any computer, regardless it's a personal, regardless it's a public, we are in a BYOD setup, and we treat every incoming machine, incoming request in the same way in terms of how we identify unusual activity so that we can actually like step them up. And so that's where we lean into today. So yeah, so we treat all of them the same.
Do you have any plan to release your FIDO2 server implementation as open source?
No plans at the moment right now, but I would definitely check out like the, I think we have Java and a couple of, and Python as well, right?
Yeah, so the Netflix FIDO2 server is built on the, we have an Yubico has an open source Java server. So I think Tejas took most of that and then added obviously the logic around that. So we do have a Python one and a Java one right now that we support.
So definitely check that out for sure.
It is open source, yeah. Both projects are open source, yes.
So, from rollout point of view, right? So I understand the existing users, it's hard to go passwordless, but for new registrations, right? Any new accounts that you create in the future, when are you planning to go like completely passwordless? Like there's no need to create password anymore.
So that's where things break in the overall ecosystem and in the industry as well. You do one form of things for one set of users and you do something to the other set of users and you create this confusing experience that, hey, why Tejas is getting this experience and why Jerrod is not getting that experience, right? It creates very unbalanced experience. So that's where we are trying to keep everyone in the same bucket and not treat new and old as different things, but rather same things. And when we get there, we would make sure like we get them together there. So that's a model that we are following.
Will it ever be possible?
What's that?
Will it ever be possible?
We'll see. I mean, there's one aspect is truly getting passwordless. The other aspect is let's get your authentication story stronger and make sure like things are not presented to you when it's really not needed. Let's get there first before we even talk about like passwordless, right?
All right, thanks everybody. Thanks for coming.